Hi there, this is Carl Irwin, the Common Magician. I've got something interesting to discuss with you. This has the potential to be kind of a long discussion. I will do my best. I actually made a bunch of notes on some topics here, but by request we're going to talk about a number of different things, kind of springboarding off of recent discussions on the channel, and I'm happy to do it. And again, these are my thoughts, these are my opinions, this is how I kind of view things. This is not, authoritative by any stretch of the imagination. Either you agree with me or you don't on some things, and I really don't have extremely strong opinions about any of this stuff, but I'm going to tell you what I think given the thought that I have given to some topics here. But before I do that, I want to tell a quick story. This happened just yesterday, actually. I'm a school teacher, and yesterday I was at work, and I was teaching. I'm a band teacher, teach instrumental music. I was teaching some beginning lessons, a beginning saxophone class, about 5 or 6 kids in there, and the fire alarm goes off. So it's very cold, very chilly. I'm in Western New York, so I kind of puzzled by the fire alarm, thinking, well, this is an odd day to do a drill. So I have the kids put the instruments, take the instruments off, put them on the chair carefully. We're going to walk outside. And as we're walking outside, you can smell smoke and you can see a haze in the hallway. And I get outside and I turn around, there's people working up on the roof trying to extinguish something. This was a real fire. It was a real fire. It ended up not being very serious. In fact, we went right back to school today, and everything was fine, no structural damage, but there was a fire started around some construction that was going on, and it caused us to evacuate the building and relocate to another place in town, and the students were reunified with parents, and then they went home for the remainder of the day. We missed, about 3/4 of the day. They came back, everything's cleaned up, back to work. However, while we were relocated to a kind of a big reception hall area where we put all of the students from the school, big ballroom kind of space, it was available in the town and connected to a hotel, we kept the kids in groups, and tried to engage with them and, entertain them a little bit. I walked over to a table, and there was a deck of cards. It was actually a very old B deck, kind of worn out, and it was sitting there, and it looked like someone had abandoned a, some kind of a solitaire game. It looked kind of like this. So I walked over and I saw the cards. I don't see anybody around them. No one's there. So I, pick them up, and as I do this, a student, that knows that I do some magic, he comes over to me, high school student, he comes over, he goes, "You gonna do something?" Right? I said, "Oh, I don't know." I said, I don't know. "Whose cards are these?" I said, "Are these your cards?" And as I, ask the question, I'm going through, and I'll just kind of narrate, what I'm doing. I'm going through, and I'm immediately culling all of the aces, as I'm looking through the deck. And this is a very natural thing, kind of an example of what you can get away with in the open, but I wasn't even careful about it. I called all of the aces, and I said, "Are these your cards?" He said, "No." I said, "Do you know whose they are?" He said, "No, they've just been sitting there for like the last 30 minutes. And I said, "Oh, that's interesting." Then another student came over on my other side. He said, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, not much of anything." I said, "Name a number." Right? And he said, something like 2. That was it. So I deal off 2 cards, and I said, "Good, name another number." And, he says, I don't know, something like 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I said, name another number. And he says, I don't know, something like 4. Right? And I said, one more number. And then he gives me another number. 6, right? And I just simply bottom deal those aces out to the numbers that he calls. And as soon as I'm done, I reach over, and I've got kind of a crowd of kids now, probably about 15. And as soon as I'm done, I look at those cards, I reach over, I pick them up, and I toss them down, and that's it. And you get a great reaction. Now, keep in mind, this is with teenagers, many of whom know me, and are not kind about they're not polite about anything, right? They want to see the cards, they want to do this, they want to touch that, they want to ask questions, all this. And it landed like a ton of bricks. Okay? And I just want to point out that this effect is, to you and to me, a control type effect. There's everything about this is a gambling routine effect. However, the premise that was given to it was much simpler than that. I claimed no control. I was merely looking through the cards, right, to see that all the cards were there. I did nothing with them. I gave them a shuffle, which we'll talk about that in a minute, the implications of a shuffle. And then I just asked for numbers, 4 numbers, and I dealt them out. And they hit. In reality, it was a mentalism trick. It's a mentalism trick. To you and to me, it's a control trick. It's a card control gambling routine. However, in that moment, it was a mentalism trick. In my question to the student that I asked the numbers to, when I tossed those down, I said, how did you do that? Right? Now, let's talk about types real quick. I think there's essentially 3 types of magic. There's probably branches to those, and you can probably come up with maybe another one somewhere in there too, but I think there's essentially 3 we've been talking about. I think you have a material magical type. That is where something's transforming. It is penetrating something, going through something else, changing locations, moving on its own. Some kind of a magical thing that's happening with something, with an object, okay? Then I think you have mentalism. So you have material magic, you have mentalism magic. This would be predictions, some kind of mental forces, or the assumption of a force. You made someone think of something or say or respond in a certain way. Certainly, as we talked about before on the last video, I think hypnosis is in there too, as mentalism. And then you have a third category, which is control. That would be a gambling routine, right? So in a control routine, a claim is being made by the performer, right? They're saying, from a shuffled deck of cards, I can, do something in particular. And, for example, I can, call up a king on a cut, and you can make cards appear or whatever, and then you're controlling it and you're saying what you're doing, but the actions you're taking are normal actions. You're cutting, you're mixing, shuffling, dealing. You're doing normal kinds of controlled behavior with the cards. You're touching them and manipulating them and moving them, but the outcome does not fit the logic of what is seen. You are controlling the outcome in some way to make it work that way. So you have material magic, mentalism, and control. Now, how are these types assigned to an effect? I think first and foremost, either one of these could be self-evident. If I'm doing some kind of routine where I'm talking about a card game, and I'm talking about a poker hand, and I'm dealing and shuffling, it is self-evident that that is a control type, right? If I have an envelope that has information inside of it, and some kind of free selection is being made, or random thoughts are being given, and then whatever's in that envelope lines up with what has been said. This is mentalism. It's self-evident, right? Nothing's transforming or transposing or penetrating or anything like that. This is a prediction of some kind. It could be a chance operation. If you name a card and then name a number, and we do any card at any number, that could be mentalism, but it could just be a chance effect. In fact, a lot of magicians look at any card at any number and they say, it's just a chance thing. Like it doesn't, it's not that good of a trick. And I argue that it's not merely a chance operation, that something like that, and by the way, the invisible deck, if you're using it as a prediction, is identically the same chance operation as the Berglas effect. They're the same. Someone's going to hate me saying that and go after me, I'm sure. But they are the same. It's 1 in 52, either way you look at it, that either this was predicted by being turned over or it was predicted by two people at being at a number in position, right? So either way, it's really the same thing, but it could be a mentalist effect, or it could be a control effect, or it could be a material magical effect, depending on how it's being framed. It's not entirely self-evident unless it's just given as a prediction. Merely as a prediction, it's a mentalism trick, right? Or a chance trick. And the reason why it's a mentalism trick more than it is a chance operation is because the implication is that it will happen now. Not that it will happen one chance in 52, but that this is the one chance in 52 with a certain guarantee. And that's what makes it mentalism, is the stakes that are involved in it and the assertion of certainty in this moment, right? It's not 1 in 52 right now, it's 1 in 1. This will happen right now against the odds of one chance in 52. It will happen. Okay, and that's why it's a mentalism, self-evidently a mentalist trick. Now, the type can be not self-evident and can be assigned by premise, right? So some kind of narrative or premise can be set up that assigns a type, and we looked at that in the last video, where the illusion appears to be a material magical effect, a triumph in that case, right? And the way it's presented by premise is as a hypnosis, a sensory kind of thing. To you, it will appear that this is the way it is. But it is not actually that way. It just appears that way to you. Now, I argue that all effects, is my opinion, I argue that all effects are presumed to be of the control type. All of them are presumed to be of the control type. That means that material magical effects presumed to be control. Mentalism effects presumed to be control. And then control effects are just honest unless the method behind them is dishonest. The claim is honest, even if the method doesn't actually fit the bill of the claim, the specific claim that's being made. The claim itself, I am making this happen, is true and understood to be true. So, whereas with mentalism, the claim, you are making this happen, your thoughts, your abilities are making this happen, that is presumed to be false, and that this actually is something that the performer is controlling. And certainly with material magical effects, that is also the assumption too. And I say this is true for most people. Even in the realm of mediums, which I highly discourage, but in the realm of mediums, the presumption is that there is an entertainment purpose going on there. Even though people indulge in the premise provided, the presumption is that it is a control effect of some kind, right? Material magic and mentalism are an indulgence, I think, for most people. Penn Jillette says it, in this way, that only someone with a severe mental deficiency, or a young child, so someone, either a child or someone with the mental capacity of a very young child, would actually believe that a magical effect is a magical effect, is a magical occurrence, or that a mentalism, kind of outcome, paranormal outcome, would actually be paranormal. They presume, from a performance standpoint, a performer doing something, that this is controlled in some way. So I think chasing down some of these types with a serious kind of endeavor, I think has a limit in terms of value, right? I wouldn't try too hard to make your magical effect actually seem magical, or your mentalism effect actually seem like what it purports to be, because most people generally just don't accept that. They understand that it is a puzzle and that the premise that is provided to it is a show. Okay, so I'm getting that out of the way. Now, for mentalism specifically, things like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, these kinds of ideas like that, premises like that, can help to try to legitimize mentalism effects. And the way that they do that is they open alternative doors from physical control. So the idea there is, yes, this is control, but it is a psychological control. And I believe in psychological controls. I just don't think they are what people want to believe they are, or what magicians specifically suggest they are. They're actually something more direct, okay, in terms of psychology. So, NLP helps a little bit to try to make mentalism specifically less about control in the material, physical sense. It just introduces another concept of control, which is generally baloney. It's just not actually what is happening, okay, in the effect. So there's some room for that. Now let's talk about assigning a premise. And what we're going to get to here in this discussion is the idea of creating a perception that is not apparent at the start of the trick. Where someone is selecting a card and turning that into something that looks more like a thought of card, right? Is this possible? Is it possible to do that? Does it matter? I think is a more important first question. Is that even a worthwhile endeavor? I think it is, but I think that it's a worthwhile endeavor with some caveats that we'll get to. So that's why this discussion about types, I think, really matters. So when we're talking about shifting a type, we have to deal with assigning a premise. So assigning a premise, as I said, some effects are self-evident, but you can actually reassign a premise to an effect that has a self-evident type. You can change it from its self-evident type into something else, like what we did with the last one. There's a self-evident type in that triumph of there being a physical material effect, a magical effect. But with a nuanced language, a new premise can be created where it is not that. It's actually presumed to be an effect of hypnosis in that case, right, for a person or a group of people, perhaps, right? Again, none of this is all of this is an indulgence. All of this is an indulgence. None of this is really, it's just cute, okay? And I think we had I like to bring up the Gregory Wilson thing. He makes a point of this, that when adults in particular see a magical effect, a magician performing, they indulge in that in the moment, but when the trick is done, they want to go spend time with the adults, okay? And we just have to kind of keep that in mind, that what we're trying to do is only so serious. At the end of the day, it's really for people who like puzzles and like the indulgence of mystery. But nobody really obsesses over magical effects and types the way that magicians do, right? We really go crazy over a good effect. The general population gets wowed by a good effect. They find joy and excitement in it, but it's brief. It's brief. Ultimately, within minutes, they will walk away from that situation and carry on as if it had not happened. They won't spend the next several minutes even really dwelling on it. They just accept that it is what it is. It's a puzzle of some kind. This is summed up really well in an encounter I had with a family member, extended family member, who I learned when I was doing a trick. Someone said, "Hey, show this to him," and I did. I did coin and bottle was the effect, and I did the effect. I had a coin. It was a silver dollar, big coin, glass bottle, impromptu. The bottle was sitting there on a shelf, and bang, went in, right? And it's in there, it's jingling around. And he looked at it. He didn't even want to touch it. He looked at it and he goes, "So you find value spending your time on this?" He actually said that to me. "You find value spending your time on this?" Now, what it told me about him is that he probably doesn't like being fooled. Doesn't really like puzzles in that way. What's curious, though, is he likes puzzles. He does other kinds of puzzles. But this, for some reason, he didn't enjoy not knowing how something worked. And his guard went up, and he said that, right, in that way, fairly offensively, frankly. And my response to him was, yes, I do. I very much enjoy puzzles and mystery. And I find that most people do like a good puzzle and a good mystery, even if they can't figure it out, and perhaps especially when they can't figure it out. It's an entertaining thing, right? And I gave a very healthy response to say, I know that what I'm doing is not serious, that what I am doing is a puzzle. It is a trick. I am not the kind of person that would spend time on this as if this is going to change the world in any way, have any great, extremely big impact other than that of good entertainment value. Anyway, that's just a quick story about an encounter that I think really puts magic in perspective, because ultimately I think everybody feels the way he worded that when you get down to it. What is a good method for a trick? A good method for a trick is merely spending way too much time coming up with a way to accomplish something. Way too much time thinking about something very simple and then executing it based on as complex or complicated solution as you can find to fit the problem. To do something that required way more time than a normal person would provide to accomplishing that end. That's a method for a magic trick. We are in the business of wasting a lot of time, not building a house with real bricks and doing something tangible, but rather thinking about making a lie land, right? That's what we do. So look, I'm having this discussion just so that we can keep this in perspective, because magicians, I think, have the hardest time grasping and accepting methods that actually work, because we are too serious about what we're doing, whereas the general population that watches an effect does not think about the accomplishment of an effect the way that we do, with that kind of a serious nature, right? Okay, moving on. So assigning a premise. Now I want to talk about how we can change an effect situationally, a type of an effect. There's a few different ways to do this. Dual reality can accomplish that. So dual reality is, we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, dual reality is one. Another one is pre-show work. So that is very important to the mentalist because it's where you're soliciting information or providing information ahead of time that is then used in the boundaries of an actual effect in the performance, right? And it's that work that's done outside that is unseen and unrelated to the effect that applies. Now, it's very important to acknowledge that dual reality and pre-show for a spectator is not stooging. Okay, dual reality, where the spectator, a particular participant, is experiencing the trick a little differently or very differently than some others, the audience at large. That given does not mean that the participant, the singular participant, is a stooge. This is not stooging. It's totally different. They are still experiencing a magical effect of some kind, some type of effect, but their experience is not completely congruent with the experience of the larger audience. Okay, so dual reality in pre-show is the same because pre-show creates a dual reality if it's done well. Now, if my pre-show involves me coming up to someone and saying, hey, during the show I'm going to ask you to name something, name a card, and I want you to say the 5 of hearts, right? If I do that, I'm stooging. That is a confederate. I'm making a confederate ahead of time. That's not pre-show. That's not what pre-show is. I mean, it is done before the show, for sure, but that's not the essence of what pre-show is understood to be. Pre-show is more like when I approach someone and I say, look, in the show, I'm going to ask for help just so I don't put you on the spot and you're not very nervous about it, because this really matters in the heat, in the moment, in front of a large audience. I'm going to ask you to name a card, okay? And just so you're not fumbling all around, go ahead and name one. What is it that you would want? They name it, and now you know it. This is a very baseline kind of example, but that's an example of pre-show. Another example of pre-show is a questionnaire, where a questionnaire is given out and some details are asked for, and then that information is shared with the performer in a mentalist act. That is also a kind of pre-show, okay? Now, when that person then experiences the effect in the moment, their recollection still remains that their choice was free. Now, the question might come up in there, say, now, this is really important. We've not met before today. That answer is yes, we have not met before today, right? Nobody made you pick this choice. Is that right? This is your free choice. That's also a yes. Yes, this is my free choice. Okay, so this is not some kind of conspiracy. No. This is not a conspiracy. All of that is true, but to the audience it has a different meaning. To them, there's a dual reality. They have a reality in which that choice was made right now, and all those things are true. To the person that's participating in giving that response, all of that is true as of an hour prior. Okay? They're still experiencing a magical effect. They don't know why this particular outcome would work this way, even though they provided that information and it was given ahead of time. It does not necessarily answer the question how a particular outcome was able to be accomplished. Okay? But it is different. They gave their information at a different time, which enabled the method in some way. Okay? So very basic kind of example, but it's not stooging. Now, the third kind, so you have dual reality, pre-show, and then this is the other way that I find that you can change the situation with an effect, changing its type and assigning a different premise and changing kind of the presumptions of the method, or the unavailability of a method. We'll say that, shutting all the doors. I think that you can use something what I refer to as in-show, pre-show. In-show, pre-show. Some of you are going to hate this concept. you're going to say that what I'm talking about is wishful thinking. It is not. It is not wishful thinking. Okay? And I'll explain why I know that this is not wishful thinking. This is a real thing. Project Alpha is always what comes to mind when I talk about this concept. Project Alpha is the story of James Randi, magician James Randi, and a group of scientists at the McDonald Laboratory, where they were studying paranormal activity, different types, ESP, this kind of stuff, under scientific conditions. Okay, so real story. Many of you know the story. James Randi contacted the McDonald Laboratory and gave them his thoughts on how this should be done. Unbeknownst to them, he hired 2 young magicians. Steve Shaw, who we now know as Banachek, and Michael Edwards. Okay, 2 teenage magicians, 17 and 18, I think they were when they started. And they came in as subjects that the McDonald Laboratory was going to be evaluating for paranormal activity and capability. Now, they didn't know that they were magicians. They thought they were real. They thought they were real subjects. Okay, that they purported to have real psychic ability. Now, what happened is they did all of their magic. They used all of their magic methods to fool the scientists. Now, what was going on is Randi was telling the scientists how they should conduct their experiments. And he wasn't throwing them off. He was telling them legitimately, this is the kind of test scenario you should have. Things should be on camera. Everything should be labeled. Things should be secure and locked down. You need to keep your eyes on your subjects, right? There should be very high rigor and restriction in evaluating the subjects in this test environment. This is the worst kind of test case scenario. The worst. And ultimately, Shaw and Edwards were able to fool these scientists into thinking that they had psychic, telekinetic capabilities. And the way that they were able to do this comes down to this concept that I put forward that is really in-show, pre-show. The reason why I believe in this concept is because it exists in real history, right, as an actual application. Now, consider this for a moment. A scientific observation is of a considerably higher scrutiny than an audience, because a scientific observation is targeting specific methods at a rigor that is not really accessible to the normal kind of class of spectator, right? A general audience. And also, the scientific observation is fluid and changing. It's always adapting. And it's unpredictable in its adaptation, which makes it very difficult to beat, right? Yet, it has been done, and it can be done. And the only way it can be done is that within the boundaries, within the restrictions. So let's take the Berglas effect, because it's just such a good example, right? You could do the invisible deck too, but we'll do the Berglas effect. Take this. No, let's do the invisible deck because we get sick of talking about the Berglas effect. Okay, Jack of clubs, right, is facing up, facing the wrong way in the deck. That is the one. In this situation, you would have to find a way inside the show, not prior to the show, not out of view. This is not like where I would approach someone and say, hey, what card would you pick if you picked a card? And they say, oh, the Jack of Clubs. So that's okay. It's the one you want. Now, just remember that, so that whenever we go do this, you're not nervous about it, and you're not fumbling around trying to think. Okay, so you have this in your head. And now I just turn over the Jack of Clubs and I put it in the deck, and then it's done. Okay, that's pre-show. In-show pre-show means that it has to be done in front of full, complete, open view with everybody, right? So how would you get into the situation? What would you have to do that? You would have to get control. You would have to know the choice. You would have to get control over the choice. And then you would have to make the situation proper for the revelation. You'd have to do all those things. Can it be done? Yes, but it means that you have to change something about the presentation itself. And you have to divorce that change from the boundaries of the experience of the presentation somehow. How do you do that? Well, I've talked about ways to do that, and many purists say, no, that's not acceptable. You can't do that. But that's not how spectators view it. That's not how the scientists viewed it when Shaw and Edwards did what they did. Okay, they didn't see things that way. They were just fooled. Okay, they had a fast one pulled on them, and they didn't see it coming. So let's go back to the Berglas effect one. What are the restrictions, right? The restrictions are that the deck of cards has to be, they say, sitting in the box in full view the entire time, and the magician never touches the cards, right? That's number one. 2, the card has to be freely named, freely thought of and named. 3, the number has to be freely thought of and named by somebody else. 4, someone else has to deal those cards out. The magician can't touch them. Okay. Now, the question is which one or two or all of these, how can we violate those restrictions and maintain the illusion of the restrictions? That's the actual question. If you can do that, then you can do in-show, pre-show. Right? You just have to find a way to do that. So now we have to define what some things mean. So, for example, in this situation of the Berglas effect, what's the story with the cards? The cards have to be in the box in full view and never touched by the performer. This is stupid. They were touched by me. I put them there. Right? They're not even being mixed. There's no verification on that. They could be in an order of some kind. Not that that would necessarily help, but we know better. It could help, right? That's not part of the restriction. But they were put there by the performer. They had to be. So let's say in an actual presentation of the Berglas effect, a violation happens. Here's the cards, and the magician takes the cards out and touches them. Well, now what? How can I maintain this particular performance in this moment? Is there like now a shelf life or something where I have to wait 24 hours before doing the trick again? Does it have to be a week, a month? Do I have to buy entirely new cards? Do I need to have the cards delivered so that I'm not the one touching them? What do I have to do to make my error of touching the cards right again? What do I have to do? There must be something I can do to nullify this problem. And if I can nullify this problem, then it means that I can touch the cards, provided that I nullify the fact that I touch the cards. Okay. This is how magicians are fooled, by the way. Okay. A magician looks at a situation and they stop caring about any rules or restrictions as soon as, to them in their eye and their knowledge and understanding of magic and method, so provided that their understanding of it is not triggered by some action. They don't look at it and say, that there's a move or a tactic. They think, well, you'd have to do this, or this, and I don't see any of that. It's not there. Therefore, the fact that a rule was broken means that it wasn't broken. It was only superficially broken, but all the things that you would have had to have done, you did not do. Right? Magicians fall for this stuff all the time. I've seen magicians fall for very simple things because their mind is thinking differently about regulation than about what is actually being done in the moment. Right? So, shuffled deck, never touched. Can I nullify that? Yes. How do I nullify that? Shuffle the cards. If the cards are convincingly shuffled, then that takes care of the boundaries of the start of the trick. Okay, so that's one thing. So as soon as a card is handled, I've corrupted the effect. If I've handled the cards, the effect is corrupted. But if I shuffle the cards, game is back on again. We're good. Okay? Turn on the clock. We're ready to play. As long as I've reset the situation in a good shuffle, a convincing shuffle does that, right? Now, the next thing here is that you need to understand forces and what forces are and how they work. A selected card versus a thought of card. What is the difference between the two? So, for example, if I say 4 of clubs, I just randomly thought of a card. And by the way, what was my choices? 1 out of 52 identities. That I would say 4 of clubs was a 1 in 52 chance that I would say that. 1 in 52. This is the one I chose. If I pick a card, it's the 10 of clubs. This is also the same odds. 1 chance in 52 that I would say, or pick rather, the 10 of clubs. These two things are identical in terms of chance opportunity. They're not identical in terms of freedom of choice. Okay? They're identical in terms of outcome, but they're not identical in terms of freedom of choice. Does that matter? To most spectators, it does not matter because they don't see a difference. They know that it's 1 in 52 one way or 1 in 52. This is intuitive. If I can freely select, especially if the cards were shuffled. If the cards were shuffled up, convincingly shuffled. There's no way I controlled this. It just, the cards are shuffled. They're mixed. And then a card is freely chosen. This is the start of like every trick. Every pick a card trick is this. And it's perfectly fair. It's just presumed to be. But it doesn't have to be because obviously we know that there's forces. It could be forced. Okay. So a selected versus thought of card. How do you turn then the illusion of freedom, this is the illusion of freedom, into real freedom? How do you shift that? Okay. Well, I think some of that has to do with what you do with the card. Just because I know what the choice is, if they name it, I know what the choice is. If they pick it, I know what the choice is. If what I'm going to do involves this card, well, what do I need to do to get myself back to square one so that I can do the Berglas effect with all the rules in place? The cards need to be shuffled and then out of my control. That puts me back at the very beginning of the effect. But now I have information and I've had control over a card. Okay, so you see, this is how you do it. This is what we mentalist and reviewer Nick Tan, he likes to say tap dance, right? This is the tap dance. That's the tap dance. Is what is the procedure I'm following to set the conditions right and create the proper situation that creates a thought of card scenario when that's not what it was. It was picked. It was chosen. And if I can do that, then I can force it. I can force it, nullify the selection moment or nullify the control, move on, and still accomplish the same effect. Okay, this is what you have to do. Another thing, too, is a selection by thought and a selection by view is the same thing to a spectator. It actually is the same thing. Me saying 4 of clubs is the same as me looking through here and saying 4 of clubs, right? So one thing that I like to do to try to get in-show, pre-show, we'll talk about boundaries here as we get to the end of it. One thing I like to do is I take the cards and I say, go ahead, name any card that you see in the deck. I'm asking the same question of think of any card, but what I've done is I've actually put the cards in the open, and because they are in the open and I'm the one touching them, I now have control over something that is named in the open. But I'm also motivated to put this out because I'm saying, look, this is your menu. I'm not saying that overtly. What I'm saying is name any card in the deck. Or name any card that you see. Same question, right? Same premise as think of any card. But I've justified putting the cards out because I'm giving a menu of selection. And because they're out, now I'm headed into the ability to control it. And if I can control it and I know the information, I can also nullify that procedure to get myself back to square one. Now what do I have? Well, now I've got a thought of card that is in my control, and my situation is clear because the cards were mixed convincingly. That's the procedure. Okay, and I'll review this here again as we get to the end of this discussion. Now, I can also do this in such a way to create some elements of dual reality, but it's a little bit more nuanced, right? The one way that I can do this is by conflating some terms. You can conflate the terms of a thought of card, a card you're thinking of. This card was thought of, it was named, it was in my control, the cards were shuffled, the situation was nullified, I'm back to square one again where I'm not touching the cards, everyone remembers that, they remember that the card was named freely. But I can say the card you're merely thinking of, this is a card you named, you thought of it. You did not select this, I didn't force you to say that. All of that is true, but that doesn't change the fact that it was in my control. And it doesn't matter that it was in my control because the control was nullified by some kind of convincing mix or shuffle that put me back at square one. Okay, so this is a little bit of conflation in terms. It doesn't really get fully at dual reality, but it does. Now, in terms of the in-show, pre-show, if I can get some of that stuff outside of the bounds of the trick, then I can kind of get some dual reality, particularly as it relates to people that are viewing it, maybe even after the fact. One of the best ways to create dual reality today is that all of us are stars of a television show if you choose to be. Cell phones. You can say, look, before we do this, let's make a couple of random selections. Okay? Before we do this, let's make a couple of random selections. Okay, now we're all set. Now let's try something. You know what? You might want to turn your phone on and record this. Now I've created a large audience, an unknown future audience, and I've generated in-show, pre-show because I've created a boundary for the start of the effect. Now that we have that, let's try something. The effect starts here. That information was not essential. That was just clerical work. Okay? So I've got some alternative reality for the people that I have. It's not very strong, but it is there. But I've got very strong dual reality for between the spectators that are in person and the video that's being recorded. I get done with the effect. They've recorded the video. I say, hey, can you share that with me? They share it with me, and then I post it everywhere that I can for people to see, and it looks absolutely amazing. Okay, so this is something that is available to every single one of us. We can do pre-show in that sense, but in-show pre-show is a little bit more nuanced. Okay, some other things here about this idea. You can invest in some of this in psychological subtleties versus a direct force. I could directly force something using a known force, or I could invest in psychological subtleties where the information I'm soliciting is likely to be picked naturally. Banachek's written books about these kinds of things. I think that's fine. Just know that you're extending your tap dance a lot more when you're doing that, because every time you use a psychological subtlety, you need to have the opportunity for outs, because those don't hit every time. And if your outcome has to be specific, you're going to have a way to get an out to that. So just be aware of that there's a lot of talk amongst magicians, and particularly maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was a little bit bigger, about the topic of psychological subtleties, mental forces, psychological forces, forcing something psychologically. And it goes along with a lot of that NLP stuff that I was talking about earlier. Again, I think a lot of this is mostly rubbish. The best force you can do is one that is direct. That's my opinion. Just do the thing. It's what you want to do anyway. Just do the thing, nullify the situation somehow, and then it makes it irrelevant. I think that's a better strategy, personally. But you do whatever you want to do. Now, how does this work in terms of reality? Let's take an example, a test case, right? I always use this as my example because this is my favorite any card at any number to perform. This is my go-to one. And magicians hate it. They hate it. But I swear to you, every time I perform this for real spectators, they are flabbergasted. It just hits so hard. To them, they are seeing what I call the Berglas effect. Okay? And I think it's a good case study in this because it demonstrates the principles that I've been talking about and the way that in-show, pre-show can be done. I always start this way. I say, hey, before I show you something really crazy, let's do a couple things here. Let's just name any card that you see, name any one you see. They'll say, 7 of diamonds. I say, great, 7 of diamonds. And we have a 7 of diamonds. Just be clear, there's no other 7 of diamonds in there. You can see yes. Now, I'm using this opportunity, this premise of verifying that there's only one as a security feature on their behalf. But it's not. It's the opposite. I'm getting control. But it appears that I'm actually upping the security. I'm verifying that that was a free selection and there's only one. Okay, so far so good. And remember the premise of this. Before I show you something really crazy, let's do a couple things. That was one. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I take the card and I throw it on top, and then I just shuffle it to the bottom. And then I maintain it at the bottom. I say, no, good. I'm just going to mix the cards up. We're going to shuffle these really good. Now, it's important you understand that I don't know where the card is, but it doesn't matter if I know where the card is. It doesn't even matter if you know where the card is. It only matters that they don't know where the card is, and I point to someone else. Okay? So far so good. I've done that. I've got the card controlled to the bottom. Okay? Now I can say, could I have you, and I'm not going to touch the cards. This is really important. We all understand this, right? I'm not going to touch them. This is something that you are going to do. I've convincingly nullified the situation. There's no reason to think that shuffle is false, and it doesn't matter anyway because I'm not going to be the one doing it. That's what I've said. I'm not going to touch the cards. I say, could you cut approximately half the cards and set the top right there? They do that. They cut it off like that. And then I reach out and I say, great, very fairly, you cut the cards. I did not touch the cards. I did not do this. This is something that you did. Okay. Now I have the cards sitting here like that. And then I can go on and I can say, now let's try something here. Could you, you might want to turn on your camera for this. Go ahead and turn on your camera and record, right? And they're recording. And now I'm all set. I've made a situation here that I can recap on the camera. I could say, now look, you're thinking of a card, right? What's a card you're thinking of? And then they say it. Now, part of this is not really a miscall. I could do a miscall, but I don't have to. It's better if I don't, because it's as if I'm getting this information for the first time. But I do want to look puzzled, like I don't remember. And they'll name it. They'll say 7 of diamonds or whatever it was. I think that's what it was. Yeah, 7 of diamonds. 7 of diamonds, right? And then I'll say, great. And you have a number of cards, right? Go ahead. Why don't you pick up that packet right there? And they pick up the packet and they hold it. And I say, now you're going to do this. I won't touch it. And I have not touched the cards. Is that right? And everyone goes, yes, I've not touched the cards. I've not done it. I say, now you've selected a specific number of cards and only you had control over that. It's a very special number. And it's a number that you chose. Go ahead and count the cards face up right here. And they count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Slow down, I'll say. 26. Now stop at the last one right there. This is 27, right? Or whatever it is. And I say, you picked 27. Did anybody make you pick that number? No. That was all you. We did not set this up ahead of time. Is that right? No. Okay. To them, we didn't set this up ahead of time. Even though everything that was done was actually done in the show, but done before the start of the presentation proper, the effect itself. This is in-show, pre-show. Okay. Now, I say, that's the 27th card. You said the what? The 7 of diamonds? Turn it over. It is the Berglas effect to them. It satisfies everything. I can recap those rules. I can even talk about it. And they will tell the story. And I got a video there now that shows it. It doesn't matter that in this situation, we came off of that. It doesn't matter. You know, we don't know how much the camera is seeing that. And even there's other ways to do this. You could do this in such a way where you just straight up force both the number and the card, but it seems to be a random selection. And then on the video, I'm saying, you're thinking of a card, right? And it could be any card, but you're thinking of one in particular. That's all good. Now, to get to overt forces and some, or very, direct forces, you can force a card on view, and I think this works better if you reverse fan the cards. You just hold the card out and you show one card and you say, go ahead, think of a card that you see. Now, if this is from a shuffled deck, it's going to be the 3 clubs. Okay, deck is shuffled. Apparently cut. And I say, look, I just want you to think of any card that you see. And I hold it up and I say, go ahead, think of any card. Think of the card that you see. They look and they see only one card, right? And they do this. This is a very, there's a magician that does this a lot, I'll say. I don't really want to associate this with that person on this video because it's not for me to teach that. But this is something that can be done. Another version of this that I saw Mark Paul do is a force from an apparently shuffled deck of cards. I've mentioned this on the channel before, but it looks like this. Cards get shuffled, right? And the situation is that I just spread the cards. And I say, here, go ahead and take a card. And I just hand the card I want them to take out. I just hold it out at the break. You know, the 5 of hearts is the one that I wanted to give. So I shuffled it in, cut it in, spread, and I say, here, just take a card. This works, it flies, because it is random. It looks like a completely random choice, even though it's provided directly to them, but it's coming off of something that looks like a convincing mix. I've nullified the idea that I could possibly know what this is. And then I could say, go ahead and take a look right there, that one, right? So it could be any card, could be any card in the deck. I'm only showing them one. That's the one they're thinking of. And then later on I can say, and this is a card you're merely thinking of. Yes? And if this is done on video, in particular, my in-show pre-show becomes actual pre-show for anybody that watches the video. This works, though, very well. Very direct. It's all about nullification. It's about eliminating the possibilities of interference. That is how you break rules. You break the rule by covering it with some kind of nullification, some kind of nullifying activity. All right? So you have thoughts that are free, that get turned into control. They are controlled in their placement or outcome. Then you get to a nullification or a mix. So you have thoughts, control, mix, nullification, and on top of that you can use some element of miscall or a need for recall. What was that? You're thinking of what? Right? Or you say it was the 2 of clubs. Oh no, the spades. 2 of spades, right? They correct. So it takes me out of the equation that I could possibly know the information or that I even cared. This is how you do in-show, pre-show. This is how you accomplish it. Now, how satisfying is this going to be for some of you? Not very for many of you. Many of you will say, no, I don't want to do that. And I say, fine, but you can do that, and it does have a pretty strong weight to it whenever you do your magic in this way. This can be done with anything, any force that you ever do. You know, if I provided that I have shuffled the cards, that's the key, convincingly, right? So I shuffle the cards up, and then I spread them out. You know, I say, go ahead, reach out and touch any card. They touch a card. That one right there. Okay, very good. Go ahead and take a look. Think of the card you see. It could have been any card. It could have been any card in there, completely random, right? This is merely a card that you're thinking of. Nobody made you think of that one, is that right? I just showed them only one. Of course I made them think of only that one, but I can say something like that and they'll nod their head and say, yes, nobody made me think of that, because in their mind, this was random. I did not assign that card to them. I couldn't have done that. I've apparently shut the door on it, and now I've conflated the concept of a thought of card with a selected card. Okay, so this is how these are the hoops you have to jump through in order to get pre-show inside the show. And again, that statement, before we begin, before I show you something really crazy, let's get a little bit of information here. You just set your procedure separate from the effect, and they will forget. They really will forget. This is unimportant. This is clerical work, as I say. This is not important to what's going to come. The effect actually starts here once all that is done. Okay? And as long as it's not extremely process heavy and terribly memorable, that flies right by. But anyway, that's how you accomplish that. Now, in terms of the invisible deck, right, what does this mean? Well, yeah, it can mean that a card is selected. You know, it can mean that. It can mean that the card is selected and that the card is returned to the deck, you know, and shuffled in. It can mean that. It can mean that it's, you know, shuffled in any way, right? It can mean that. Provided that you nullify the situation. It could be in there upside down. I haven't made any mention of that, but I have to get distance from the situation. I got to prove something. You could have picked any card, push a block, right? It's in there somewhere, whatever. Imagine for a moment, I'm not going to touch the cards. It's really important you understand that. I'm not going to do this. You're going to do that. Imagine that you invisibly take out the card that you're thinking of, you turn it over, and you slide it back in. So now I'm in a situation where it's potentially a merely thought of card. It's possible, okay? It's controlled, but it's possible. It's a merely thought of card. It doesn't even have to be a forced card. It could be a forced card. I could have a duplicate. I could have a double facer. That's a possibility. A double facer that's in there so that when its backs are up, you see the face stick out. Right? That could be my revelation card. They don't have to take the card. It just could be it. I could have forced the card on them, and it's a card they're merely thinking of. Right? It could be a free selection, and it's returned, but then reversed, and then hidden, and then set aside. It just has to be convincing. I have to be able to reset my conditions here, and this is where the show starts. The stuff before that was clerical. This is where it starts. Now, look, I'm not going to touch the deck. I'm going to show you something amazing. In fact, why don't you turn on that camera, get this on video. You're going to want to have this later. Turn on the camera, right? And I say, imagine that you're thinking of a card right now, right? This is even better than the invisible deck, because the invisible deck, they have to name it. Here, they don't have to name anything, right? So they say, yeah, I've got the card in mind. Imagine you're sliding that out invisibly and you turn it over. It's actually the invisible deck by narrative, because I'm talking about something that is invisible. You imagine you slide it back in. Now, what's amazing is you've actually done it. You've actually done it with the deck. This is a card you're merely thinking of. I don't even know what it is. Nobody knows. It's only in your own mind, even though it was forced on them. Maybe in a very direct way, like that Mark Paul thing, right? Now they take a look at the cards. They get spread out. Someone else does it, and it shows what it is. Jack of Diamonds there. So again, or again, you force a card specifically, and you have a duplicate double facer in there. That's another way to do it. But there are ways to do this where you're all kinds of dirty. They're making not randomly, not freely thought selections, but they're actually making hands-on selections, and you're nullifying the situation so that doesn't matter anymore, to get myself back to square one. All right, that's how that is accomplished. And these are my thoughts on this. And again, I go back to that Steve Shaw, Michael Edwards stuff, where essentially everything they were doing was being done in the open against the test conditions that were set. They were violating all of the conditions all of the time, but they were doing it in such a way that they're doing pre-show, in-show, so that the scientists that are observing them are discounting clerical moments, offhand moments, outside of the bounds of the presentation, outside the bounds of the start of the video that they're taking, right? That's how you accomplish that. And if you give a lot of consideration and thought to this, you really can do almost any feat that would require a sophisticated gimmick deck with a regular deck of cards. Now, will magicians accept that explanation? No. Many of you won't accept it. You'll say, nope, that doesn't work. But my point is that to the view of a real spectator, they're completely satisfied. Remember, they don't take this that seriously. They are completely satisfied if you can nullify the situation. And don't forget, all of card control magic operates on the concept of a false shuffle, of falsely doing something that looks legitimate. If an entire category of magic can operate on that, surely I can import that concept into any other effect that I'm performing and get away with it, right? Shaw and Edwards did that very thing. So those are my thoughts on the subject. Maybe this resonates with some of you. You can, of course, take this in further directions, further branching, springboard off of this into other areas as well. But in general, that is what I consider to be in-show, pre-show, and how to wield it. Free thoughts, or a force that is convincingly nullified or convincingly fair. Control, which is taken, then the control is nullified through some action, maybe a shuffle, a convincing shuffle. Sometimes you can do shuffles where they're shuffling the deck. You hand out packets, you shuffle, but I'm shuffling this one, right? I'm maintaining my card on the bottom. They've shuffled theirs, I take all the packs back, right? On top of that, I do what appears to be a legitimate shuffle, but I'm actually still holding my bottom card. I've maintained a card in a deck that was shuffled by everybody in extreme ways. I've absolutely nullified any kind of control I had before then. Like, I've got no control over this deck as far as anyone's concerned. I might as well be starting my Bergloss effect with the cards sitting in the box on a stool 20 feet away from me, because I'm in that situation now. That's how I got in it before. I just had a shuffled deck put out on the stage. Obviously, I touched them at some point. What's the statute of limitations on touching the cards? I don't know. As long as you nullify whatever you've done, you're starting over. You're good. That's where the trick begins. So, thoughts, free or forced, control, nullification, and then miscall. Acting like you don't know. Acting like you're under or you're behind on the information. This is very powerful, very useful. So anyway, those are my thoughts on that. You can take that formula, apply it wherever you want. Best of luck with that, and happy magicking.